Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. We're excited to tell you a little bit more about our project, which was advancing Michigan's water conservation and efficiency efforts with a specific focus on climate, energy, and water infrastructure. We were partnered with EGLE as well as Team 5 was, but more specifically with the Office of the Great Lakes, which is charged with water conservation, protection and restoration, water levels and use, water quality monitoring, as well as coastal resources and management. That was what I just said. So our fellows team, if you don't know us by now, consisted of Jeffrey Manor, myself, Alex Kalenda. We have Aaron Cohen, Christina Curtis, and Tyler Orcutt. Unfortunately, only two of us could be here today. Our advisor is Dr. Jennifer Reed, who we're happy to have here with us, the Water Center Director at the Graham Sustainability Institute. So as I mentioned, we were partnered with EGLE, which protects Michigan's environment / public health by managing air, water, land, and energy resources. We were more specifically partnered with the Water Use Advisory Council through the Office of the Great Lakes. And the Water Use Advisory Council regulates Michigan's water use program, including something called the Great Lakes Compact. So the state of Michigan, for some background information, has policies and programs that address climate, energy, and water that also help to achieve Michigan's water conservation and efficiency goals. And this is all established under something called the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin Water Resources Compact that is signed by Michigan as well as all of the other Great Lakes states. And so what we came up with working with the Water Conservation and Efficiency Committee, we came up with two main tasks for us for our project. The first one being to assess Michigan's current climate, energy, sustainability, and water infrastructure policies and programs in order to identify specific policies and programs not already reported that do fulfill Michigan's compact obligations. And then on top of that, we were also charged with reviewing the 5-year compact program reviews for those other Great Lakes states as well as water-rich states in order to identify any exemplar innovative water conservation and efficiency programs that Michigan could adopt and utilize to improve their own programming. So our research objectives were accomplished by conducting a thorough literature review and interviewing in other states who work with their water conservation and efficiency programs. And just for sake of time, I'm going to abbreviate water conservation and efficiency to WCE, as it is a mouthful. We began by reviewing programs related to WCE, climate, energy, water infrastructure, and sustainability in Michigan to identify programs that contribute to the goals under the compact. We then worked with our client, Emily Fennell, at EGLE to identify and interview personnel from select departments within Michigan in order to augment and clarify the results that we got from that literature review. Following our review of Michigan's programs, we expanded our research to look at water-related programs in other Great Lakes states, as well as 4 selected water-rich states across the country. And then using the results from that literature review, as well as the interviews that we conducted, we identified several areas where further programmatic development could strengthen Michigan's implementation of the compact. Hopefully you can see that. I'm sorry, it's a little bit small. But as I mentioned, we analyzed other water-rich states beyond those Great Lakes states. And so we came up with Florida, Louisiana, Colorado, and Missouri that may help to meet needs of that we identified in our research of Michigan's programs and any gaps in those programs. We used the following matrix to determine states with similarities to Michigan's water use and policy landscape. So in order to develop the landscape, we assessed states based on their freshwater resources, their water use, demographics, and geography. So states with similar freshwater resources and water use as Michigan were actually identified using data from the U.S. Geological Survey. States with similar demographics to Michigan were identified using the Election State Similarity Index. And then finally, states bordering or near bordering Michigan were identified as geographically similar to Michigan. So as I mentioned, in parallel with the literature review, we conducted interviews with a number of personnel from Michigan's quality of life agencies who work with water conservation and efficiency programs, as well as other programs, climate change, energy, that contribute to the state's commitments under the compact. We asked the following questions to Michigan agency personnel. I won't read off all of them, but one that we got a great deal of input from included bullet 2, what challenges or issues has your unit faced implementing water conservation? how are you overcoming these challenges? I think we gained a lot of insight from that question. And then here are some of the questions that we asked for our other states, as well as we actually had an opportunity to talk with an individual over at the US EPA too. So one of the sample questions here I'll mention, bullet point 3, are there any conservation initiatives that your state promotes that you think could be beneficial to other states? Really helped us to gain insight. And this is just a small sample of many, many questions that we asked these different people. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Aaron.
Yes, so I'm going to go over some of the key points. After synthesizing the information gleaned through the interviews and a literature review, we identified 8 categories where there are promising opportunities for Michigan to explore how to expand WCE under 3 broad headings: public engagement, data and technology, funding and infrastructure. Starting with public and industry engagement, Michigan has conducted relatively little outreach to the general public about the importance of water conservation when compared to the efforts expended in other states. A high level of public engagement by the state can have a profound impact on general opinion and support for WCE and for municipal and other public water conservation and infrastructure investment. Moving on to the next bullet, multiple Michigan statutes call for the formation of a local water use groups to enable the discussion of watershed issues among different communities. However, to date, no water groups have been created in the entire state of Michigan, and this is a big issue. This is increased support from EGLE is a big opportunity in this area. We're going to talk a bit more on data and technology later on in the presentation, but a quick note is that the literature in our interviews indicated there are a lot of opportunities for improving both the implementation of innovative water conservation technology and information sharing between scientists and government agencies. Ending with funding and infrastructure. Insufficient funding at the federal level and limited staffing at the state level means that EGLE is not able to provide supplemental programming that aim at supporting voluntary water conservation and efficiency practices. To leverage existing resources, Michigan should infuse WC initiatives into all climate-oriented planning. Lastly, as the previous group discussed, Michigan's aging water infrastructure impacts both water quality and the conservation efforts. The Water Energy Nexus projects can have tremendous benefit across the state, and all new legislation focused on water energy should entail conservation metrics for both areas. Kind of focusing on a couple of key challenges within policy and culture, starting with our first policy bullet. Many policies and programs that we found are outside of the state that can be implemented are outside the scope of EGLE and require legislative action. This requires the political will to be there and knowledgeable policymakers on the eccentricities of water conservation. Moving on to scenario planning, this is an area where we saw great potential in the creation of formal plans and visioning exercises. However, it requires a good amount of additional funding from the state to EGLE to purchase the necessary planning support systems and ensure participatory planning. It also requires all impacted stakeholders to be at the table, and some may be hesitant due to historic and current inequities caused by all levels of government. This is a nice transition into our first bullet point for culture. We heard a lot in our interviews that there is many state officials that there's a large obstacle in convincing Michiganders of the need for water conservation due to the historic fact that Michigan is a water-rich state. However, climate change is here now, causing lengths of droughts to increase, followed by periods of increased rainfall. Scenario planning through the visual models enables the ability for people to see how their water consumption in their part of the state affects others, and vice versa. Lastly, improving water conservation and efficiency measures in the state must be coupled with water quality programs. Water quantity and water quality are interrelated. An example would be fixing, as they said, fixing leaks. Unfixed leaks in pipes can lead to massive water bills, but even if the leaks are fixed with better water conservation and efficiency technology, if the WC technology are not acting at their full potential if the water coming from the faucets is contaminated at any point from withdrawal to consumption. So the key challenges in sciences and technology, one challenge we really wanted to highlight is that there's identifiable gaps between current scientific knowledge and its application into existing rules and regulations. It can take years or even decades to incorporate new science into policy. In order to increase the accuracy of hydraulic and environmental impacts models, more precise water usage data is required, such as metering, and lowering the threshold for reporting water withdrawals. That's another point to iterate that collaboration with state universities and conservation groups not only advance scientific knowledge, they build trust with the community and educate the public. These collaborations should be built upon and expanded to increase water conservation and efficiency statewide. The largest collaboration is between EGLE and the Michigan State University Extension. However, there are many more potential university partners throughout the state that are not being utilized. And we just have our acknowledgments. We just like to thank Emily Fennell, our client. A big thank you to Elizabeth Laporte, Margaret Woolridge, and Esther Wu. And a big thank you to our advisor, Dr. Jen Reed, and acknowledging all the people that we interviewed for this program. And thank you to the Dow Company Foundation for funding the program.
Questions for our last presenter?
Thank you. So you worked a lot with the state of Michigan, but also other states. And what would you consider some of the more significant challenges that states face in doing this kind of work?
I think one of the biggest things that we saw that a few states that have been mentioned that have kind of what we talk about data and working with the public, Wisconsin, New York, water is regulated by their public utility commissions. Water utilities are not regulated by the state of Michigan. So there's a whole entire system of data, resources, people available to talk about help utilities finance budgets, look at the facilities going on. That's a part to Michigan where there's 2,000 separate individual utilities without that state kind of support. But that goes back to data and baseline. Michigan does not have a baseline data to do any kind of forecasting with. So just having that state infrastructure already there to help with data, that is a big, big way to go forward.
Anyone else? Everybody's hungry. Jeff, you got it?
This is the same question some other groups have addressed, which is if there was a team to do this work going forward, what would you see the areas that you would encourage the next team to work on?
So one big thing is to make sure that there's a lot of challenges. So one is the water user groups. I can't fully speak to what's been going on behind the scenes, but no single group, this group has been able to be formed since the Great Lakes passing, since 2008 or 9 and 10. And since now, no single water user group has been formed in the entirety of the state, which is different than other states in the Great Lakes and outside of Michigan. So a group working with public health, science to understand water basins, they reach past communities, public policy, urban planning, can help to actually form these communities. I think there's also a big thing, as we talked about, there's a lot that we learned that's outside of EGLE scope that requires legislative action. It's much more legislative, but there's a big movement to talk about policy and scenario planning. We saw very different versions of future and scenario planning from Colorado, Illinois, and Pennsylvania that could be incorporated that involve planning support systems, knowledge of hydraulics, environment, policy, boundaries. That'd be really interesting to go through, and that's something that EGLE would not get. They would have to do a consultant anyway to get the proper person to do that.
I think one of the benefits of this project, a benefit and a curse is it was so broad in scope that there's so many different ways that it truly could go. And I think Erin just mentioned like a couple, but there are infinite, I think, possibilities for that. I think the work is, I don't want to say endless because that doesn't feel optimistic, but there are certainly many.
You mentioned this is louder than I thought. You mentioned the idea that it's difficult for Michiganders, like this sense that we need to conserve water. Do you have any practical tips on or turn up in your research from other water-rich states or, that have been able to change that mindset?
So the best example was Colorado. The Colorado Water Conservation Board entailed a statewide scenario planning initiative. So there's 9 basins, each representing one river in Colorado, and the 9th is the Denver. Each basin was tasked to create various different low, medium, high future water consumptions based off of agriculture, economic, and understanding. Out of that little exercise, 34 different scenarios came out, and the basin saw how consumption in one side of the state visually impacts the other. And then from there, the Conservation Board, by consensus of every single 9 basins, took out 10 themes and they created 5 different explorative scenarios for the state of Colorado to go through their water conservation. So that brought everybody to the table and they could visually see how, oh, if this basin doesn't do this, we're all screwed. We're all in this together and how we need to do this water conservation as a team. And it led to a consensus agreement by all 9 basins on the strategy to go through, which I think is pretty impressive.
Last quick question.
Just to follow on to that, did you see then how that translated into public outreach? Because you said that was one of the areas where EGLE just doesn't have the resources to do like a public awareness campaign on voluntarily conserving water. Do you have examples of that?
Colorado, again, they were very open that they're also lacking, but they were very open with us on that we are struggling to not just get out there, but we're struggling just to get out there in English, that we need to get out there in every language, in every way as possible. And so they took that as well. Wisconsin also really took out the initiative to go to industry fairs, not just to technical, and to go out and have someone from their Department of Natural Resources to be there whenever possible, hoping to do that as well. And then Missouri had another interesting system that's funded through a tax that was refunded by 80% of the state in 2018 to fund that people can apply to their water conservation district, which is a county, and every single county has 2 to 3 water conservation specialists that can go out to them, help them with their application, talk them through, and then they can get matching funds for water irrigation and water conservation technology. Missouri, I think, has spent $800 million in matching funds, it was big, don't quote me on that. It was big, but like that was like a big public outreach, was they have 2 people for each county just helping people with the applications in water conservation and efficiency. And the most notable thing is they tied water and soil together. It was water and soil conservation, which is something that no other state did.